Senator Hunt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I hope that colleagues listen to the points that Senator John Kavanaugh was just making, because that's exactly right. We heard a lot of discussion yesterday about whether the amendment that we're considering defies the will of Nebraska voters. And the introducer of the amendment stood up and talked about all kinds of examples where the people of Nebraska passed ballot language, and then the legislature came in and redefined the language or tweaked it or clarified it and things like that. But this is a textual legal argument. It's not that the voters voted on the ballot saying, here's an idea that we generally like, now we'd like the legislature to implement it. Yes, we have had measures like that in the past, but that's not what this measure says. You know, I have it in front of me, and Senator John Kavanaugh read it, and what this measure specifically says, eligible employees, the right to earn paid sick leave, entitles employers with fewer than 20 employees to accrue and use up to 40 hours of such time annually, and those employed by employers with 20 or more employees to accrue and use up to 56 hours of such time annually. And it doesn't say, and legislature, please go in and decide what you think that means. The language is in the ballot. So I know that we don't think this way and we don't work this way, and the assumption of the courts is that anything the legislature ends up passing is constitutional. But you know, with the decline in experience, expertise, quality, respect for separation of powers, respect for the institution that this legislature has seen, we can expect more and more legal challenges for issues like this going forward, just as we're seeing at the federal level, just as we're seeing in states that we've always thought Nebraska runs their government a lot better than other states, and I believe that. But part of the reason other states have these problems is because of the partisan division and the blind loyalty and the pushing through policy at any cost, and then letting the courts sort it out in these protracted, years-long, expensive, at the expense of the taxpayers, mind you, court battles over politics. And that traditionally in Nebraska has not been the way that we do things. We can avoid that kind of cost to taxpayers. We can avoid that kind of costly legal battle by doing our work the right way in this body. And I believe that passing this amendment from Senator Strawman, it is not us doing our work diligently, thoughtfully, because we're going to end up with legal issues. Because the people of Nebraska already spoke on the ballot language is here, and told us what they would like us to do. The best way to determine the will of the voters is just to read what the heck they voted for, and it's right here on the ballot. So this is the object clause. It went before every voter, and it made clear that they were voting on 2 tiers of paid sick leave for small businesses and for larger businesses. And the amendment from Senator Strawman does substantially change the core provisions of the initiative. And one of the big changes under this amendment that really strikes at the heart of the problem is that it strips away the anti-retaliation protections for workers who use their sick leave. I'll say that one more time, colleagues. This amendment takes away the anti-retaliation protections that workers can expect just for using their sick leave. So in plain terms, it would no longer prohibit an employer from punishing or firing someone for using the sick days that they've earned. Colleagues, that change renders the whole law almost meaningless. What good is a right to sick leave if it can get you fired if you use it? Most low-wage workers will tell you if there's no protection, they are terrified of retaliation. They'll go to work with a fever, or they'll send a sick kid to school because they don't want to risk angering the boss. And from listening to some of you yesterday talk about the disdain you have for your own employees, I know I probably work with some of those bosses. Some of you in this room would probably retaliate against your workers if they used a sick day. And Senator Strawman's amendment makes that legal, basically gutting the whole entire purpose of the bill. By removing the retaliation ban, this gives bad actors a green light to intimidate employees, to punish employees just for taking the sick leave that they are entitled to according to Nebraska voters. And I'll continue this thought on my next time on the mic. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Arch would like to recognize 65 fourth graders from Trumbull Park Elementary in Papillion seated in the north balcony. Please rise and be recognized by your Nebraska legislature. Senator Hunt, you're recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, I hope that you heard what Senator John Kavanaugh just explained. I think that there are people, I don't think Senator Hughes understands, I don't think Senator Raybould understands, I don't think Senator Hallstrom understands, that when we're talking about paid leave, we're not talking about like you accept the job and then you get 2 weeks PTO and you're detasseling and then your employer has to pay you for all this time you're taking off. That's not what the law actually does. Please take a look at what the policy even is before you bring up these fantastic scenarios that aren't actually reality under this policy. I remain in opposition not only because of the policy itself, but because of what it represents. This amendment is not just a change in legislative language, it's a symbol of why so many people in this state have lost faith in this institution. And I don't mean just the legislature, I mean the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, the electoral system that we have in this country. And it's why voters across Nebraska, from every political background, say they don't trust us. They don't trust politicians. Everything that we do, colleagues, in this body is a reflection on whether or not democracy is working. You don't have a bank teller make a mistake on a deposit and then you say, well, now I'm not going to use banks. Now, this is why you can't trust banks. Nobody really says that. But when politicians do what we're doing and mess up our jobs by ignoring the will of the voters, that's the kind of thing that makes people disengage and say, that's why you can't trust politicians. Everything we do, we have to be mindful, is a reflection on whether or not democracy is working. And it's why so many people believe that it doesn't matter who's in charge, that both parties are the same, because at the end of the day, they feel like, the voters feel like they are always the ones that lose. We hear it all the time. Both parties are the same. My vote doesn't matter. Nothing ever changes. Nothing ever happens. And it's easy to dismiss those comments as apathy or cynicism. But when you look at what's happening with this amendment in this bill, it's hard to argue that they're wrong. Because here's what's happened. The people of Nebraska made their voices heard. They signed petitions, they knocked doors, they raised money, they collected signatures from every corner of this state, they put paid sick leave on the ballot, and they passed it overwhelmingly by an actual landslide, an actual mandate. They didn't ask us to do it, they did it themselves. And what are we doing now? We're finding a way to undermine it, to water it down, to walk it back, to chip away at the edges so that people like Senator Raybould can say, we respected their vote, while doing everything we can to change the result of the vote. That's what this amendment does. It's not a minor fix, it's not a minor change, it's not a technical distraction, it's not a clarification, it's a direct attempt to rewrite the will of the people under the guise of implementation. And let me say this as clearly as I can. If you only believe in democracy when it delivers the results that you like, you don't believe in democracy. The people voted, the people won, and now instead of honoring that, we're sending a message that their vote only matters when it's convenient for us. This amendment tells working Nebraskans that they were naive, that they didn't understand what they were voting for, which Senator Raybould has said herself in committee hearings, that people didn't know what they were voting for, that they got it wrong, and that we need to come and step in and fix it. Senator Strawman said the same thing on the mic here on the floor. And I will say for the record, I trust that Nebraskans knew exactly what they were voting for. And I trust their judgment more than I trust 49 politicians in this chamber. The process matters, not just because of the policy, even though paid sick leave is an urgent, necessary reform for our state, but because when people use the tools that are available to them in a democracy, we should meet them with respect. We should not meet them with obstruction. This is the kind of thing that drives people away from political engagement, that erodes public trust, that makes good people believe there's no point in participating. We tell people to show up, to get involved and vote, and then when they do that, we gut everything that they passed. Thank you, Madam President.